Now, if you take animal fat, or the other word for it is saturated fat, out of the diet, the basic core of a human being is a cell. And the core of a cell is the membrane around the cell. And that membrane is mostly fat. And an important part of that fat is saturated fat, or animal fat. And you know saturated fat because it's like butter. Because it's solid at room temperature. It solidifies or gives structure to the cell membrane. So it's really, really critical, and it's really important for young children who are growing and producing millions and millions of cells. So to take fat out of the diet is an offense. It's actually, I would regard it as a serious offense against humanity to tell people to stop, to reduce their fat content, because it inhibits their ability to form new cells or repair cells. It also reduces the level of fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, E and K, particularly D. Everybody almost in Ireland is vitamin D deficient, and we're told this is because of sunlight. Well, it's not because of sunlight, because rickets has now appeared in children. Rickets is a lack of vitamin D. It's rubber bones or wobbly bones, or not hard bones, if you like. And rickets has made a reappearance because we have reduced animal fat. And this is something very confusing, so I'm not going to, just for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to skirt over it. Cholesterol is a very important substance. The cell membrane is made up of fats, it's made up of protein, and it's made up of cholesterol. Cholesterol is not fat. Fat is a long chain of carbon molecules. It's like a piece of string. Cholesterol is ring structure. If I say benzene ring structure, do you know what I mean? It's a ring structure. It's a round structure. It's not a long, thin piece of string. Very, very different molecules, and play different roles in the body. But to reduce the levels of cholesterol is equally farcical. Cholesterol, single most important part of breast milk. Mother's breast milk is cholesterol. Important for growing children. Various hormones, estrogen, progesterone, cortisol, testosterone. These are hormones that are made from cholesterol. Your body is very clever. Every cell, if each one of you is a cell in the body, each of you have the capacity to produce cholesterol. It's the single most important molecule in the cell. It functions as an antioxidant. Do you know what an antioxidant is? It's important for gut function, but importantly, it's also used to make vitamin D in the body. So if you don't get enough sunlight, you can make vitamin D using cholesterol. Okay. Now, in the book I mentioned LDL cholesterol. Your LDL cholesterol is high, therefore you have to go on a statin, or you have to alter your diet or whatever. That's simply, the wording is all wrong. LDL is a bus, and cholesterol is a passenger on the bus. LDL is low density lipoprotein. It's a protein. It's a little bus that drives around your bloodstream, and it carries certain passengers, like the fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, and E. It'll carry them. It'll carry fats or fatty acids, and it'll carry cholesterol. So to call it LDL cholesterol is a misnomer, a serious misnomer, because everybody thinks then cholesterol is bad news. Cholesterol is anything but bad news. The aim of the food pyramid was to reduce heart disease initially. It hasn't achieved that objective. To reduce obesity, well, if by 2050 we're all going to be overweight, it clearly hasn't achieved that objective either. And cancer is on the increase, and that's partly because of the fat deposition in the cells. Fat creates estrogen, and that produces cancers. The fat does something else. It produces what's called inflammatory markers, and these inflammatory markers set up heart disease, set up strokes, set up other cancers. So fat deposited in cells is really bad news. And then what happens when the cell gets loaded with fat? it's bursting with fat, it becomes, it malfunctions. So when insulin attaches to the receptor on the cell doesn't recognize it and doesn't respond to it. So it doesn't allow glucose into the bloodstream. So up goes your glucose level. Now you get type 2 diabetes. All as a consequence of fat being deposited in the body, in organs in the body. Subcutaneous fat is much less harmful. That's just fat underneath the skin. Everybody's got a bit of that. Why persist? What I really don't understand, what confuses me, is what I'm talking about is simple basic science. There's nothing too complicated about what I'm saying. But why do we hear the same advice over and over and over? The advice that kills me when I hear it is eat more carbohydrates or eat a healthy diet and exercise more. That's ridiculous advice. I mean, exercise is great for people. I'm not criticizing don't exercise. I'm not saying don't exercise at all. I'm saying exercise has nothing to do with the equation, these health problems that we're dealing with here. It literally has nothing to do, and again, that's a piece of research that has been shelved by the British government and by other governments. So we persist with this, and it seems to be conflicts of interest. And Professor James, who is head of the International Obesity Task Force, produced those two reports in 1998 and 2003, and is himself very dismayed, very disillusioned. As an international authority on obesity, he has virtually given up the ghost, and he's no longer the head of the International Obesity Task Force. Professor MacDonald, I've mentioned as advisor to the British government. The Dietetics Association, I have no argument with dietitians or dietetic associations. But again, who sponsors them? It's like medicine is sponsored by pharmaceutical companies. Everything in medicine is sponsored by pharmaceutical companies. I'm quite sure the meeting next door, I'd lay €1 million, if I had €1 million, that meeting next door is sponsored by a pharmaceutical company. All the research is sponsored by pharmaceutical companies. Medical schools are sponsored by pharmaceutical companies. So medicine has no room to speak, really. They're discredited by their mere association, and pharmaceutical companies are now part of some of the food companies. So they're one and the same thing almost. But dietitians, to come back to dietitians are the main people who give advice in hospitals, in government practice, if you like. The Irish Dietetic Association is sponsored by Kellogg's, it's sponsored by Danone, it's sponsored by Abbott, it's sponsored by food companies, basically. There's a conflict of interest. If I personally am sponsored, or my association is sponsored, I'm going to be more reluctant to speak out against them, because I'll get kicked out of the organization, first of all, having worked very hard to get into it, and whatever research money I had has just disappeared. So doctors and dietitians and others, although they may feel a conflict of interest, are less likely to speak out. And I'm not to discredit anybody here, but this association has to stop in the same way that medicine and drug companies has to stop. These associations that are silencing people has to stop. Who gains from this advice? Food manufacturers, drug companies, chemical companies. Now, to come to the composition of the human body, you might be dismayed to know that 50 to 60% of your body is water. That's not too alarming. But the next statement that 90% of the cells in your body are bacteria. That's a creepy crawly thought. So 90% of you, 90% of you, 90% of me, 90% of Cecilia, bacteria. So the two most critical foods that you have to take on a daily basis, one of them is water, and the second one is bacteria. After that, fat is the next most important food item. After that comes protein. And that's why primitive people, fat is also a source of energy. We talked about glucose as being a quick source of energy. Fat is a slower source of energy, but it gives you much more energy per gram. It gives you 9 calories per gram as distinct from 4 calories per gram with carbohydrates. So it's a better form of energy actually, and that's why primitive people can live on animal foods and animal products like milk. The Maasai drink blood, very tasty stuff, blood, and obviously slaughter their animals and eat the meat, which is fat and protein. Vitamins and minerals are helpful too. And that's about it. You can live without the rest of it. Now coming to the 5-a-day slogan. I get hammered because of this slogan, because it really doesn't make sense to me. The 5-a-day slogan came because of an association between the Produce for Better Health Foundation and the National Cancer Institute in the United States. This foundation, the Better Health Foundation, is in California and is made up of food growers, seed manufacturers, logistics companies that transport food, etc., etc., everything to do with the food industry. So it was a private company, or private-public partnership really. And the NCI were very happy about it because this was a big thing. It wasn't just public money issuing statements, it was private and publicly funded. The aim was to reduce cancer. You've all had your 5-a-day today, I presume, yes? Well, it's basically a marketing slogan, but interestingly, the marketing slogan varies from country to country. In the United States, it's 9 a day. In Australia, it's 7 a day. In Denmark, it's 6 a day. In the United Kingdom, it's 5 a day, and we're lucky. We're just 4 a day. 4 a day, or sometimes they say 4+ a day. Has it had an effect on cancer? The Journal of the National Cancer Institute in April 2010, to quote Dr. Buffetta's words, 5-a-day advice has had little effect on the cancer statistics. So they themselves are openly admitting that 5-a-day doesn't work. So why in God's name do we persist with the same slogan if it's proven that it doesn't work? 5-a-day is very misleading. To me, it's very misleading because I've seen parents and they give their children fruit and veg and they say you've had your 5-a-day, and the child will ask for McDonald's or the child will ask for some sugary treat, and the parent will feel, oh yes, they've had their 5-a-day, they're protected, so we can give them sugary treats. And that's the trick, that's the misleading element to it, that it's a misleading slogan in the first place. It isn't based on any truth. As I mentioned earlier, food allergies and food intolerances are increasing exponentially. Celiac disease has increased 4-fold. And the causes for this are for this genetic manipulation of wheat in particular. Many more people have leaky gut syndrome nowadays because of the use of wheat, but also because of the use of drugs like antibiotics, the anti-inflammatory drugs, steroids, and so on. Most drugs have gastrointestinal side effects. And there's also alterations in gut ecology because of drug use, but also because of stress. Your bacterial population, which protects you, also gets altered. What's a useful thing to do? I put people on gluten-free diets. You're safe for the moment, you people in the front row. But I put people on gluten-free diets, and sometimes I feel bad about it because some of the gluten-free products in the marketplace, when you look at the ingredients at the back, this one has, I mean no discredit to Kelkin with this statement, but it has fructose glucose in it. Shouldn't be doing that. So watch out. A lot of gluten-free foods, better to make your own bread is the safest way of doing it, or get somebody to make it for you. I'm not here to tell people what to do. I'm not here to say you must eat 5 a day, or you must eat 10 a day, or 100 a day. That's nonsense. Your body will tell you what it needs. There's an intrinsic intelligence in the body, and you have to heed that and eat according to your needs. I never got told what to eat. Well, I did actually, because my mother was a bit strict. That's not entirely true, but there weren't food pyramids telling people what to do in those days, and people survived very nicely, thank you. And obesity wasn't an issue in those days. In fact, a lot of diseases, modern diseases, weren't prevalent at that time. With the exception of heart disease was on the increase. Yeah?
In the gluten-free products, what are things to watch for? Like one is
what they sweeten it with. I'd be careful about the cereal, what cereals they're using, what they sweeten it with, and what the additives are, what the other additives are. So I'd make a list of all the additives and check them on the internet. The best way is, if you make the stuff yourself, you know exactly what's in it. You don't have to be reading labels, and it's a pain in the neck reading labels. And it's a pain in the neck when you're out and about telling people that you have to be gluten-free, because waitresses in restaurants and people in supermarkets, they don't want to know, basically. Yeah?
Basically all the gluten-free breads are atrocious. A lot of the gluten-free products are horrible. Is there any, have you actually come across a good recipe book for gluten-free products?
There's one called GFCF Kids. GF for gluten-free, CF for casein-free, but it's just called gfcfkids.com. Gives you lots of recipes. And there's a very interesting book called What to Eat When You Can't Eat Anything, which is how you're going to feel when you leave here tonight. You're going to feel you're heading for Belsen or Auschwitz or whatever by the time you leave. It's called What to Eat When You Can't Eat Anything. Here's a product here. Delicious dark chocolate chip oat cookies. Very delicious. This has 21% sugar. So 1/5 of your cookie is sugar. Again, I mean no discredit to the company producing it. This is Ballymaloe relish, country relish. Very nice tasting product. It has, where's the label gone? It has 33% sugar. So 1/3 of that is sugar. And that's about the same level that Heinz tomato ketchup. So there isn't a whole lot of difference between that and tomato ketchup. Just the price is a wee bit different. And this one, my favorite of the lot, it's called Mrs. Crumbles. These are little macaroons. I do taste occasionally. This is no less than 52% sugar. So if you really want to go to town on sugar, I'd highly recommend this. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with a wee bit of sugar. There's nothing wrong with a wee bit of anything, for that matter. Obviously, if you're celiac, you shouldn't be taking gluten, but there's nothing wrong. People ask me what I eat. I eat everything almost. I don't take modern wheat, that's for sure. I can't handle modern wheat. But I will take old wheat. You can get old wheat. Dove's Farm produce old-fashioned wheat, the tall plant, with much less gluten and much less starch in it.
What's the name?
Doves, D-O-V-E-S, Doves, yeah. Now, food intake has increased exponentially in the Western world. The main reason for this is because some of these foods are actually addictive. They attach to certain receptors in the brain. They've done CAT scans on people, and they've shown that some of these receptors, like I was talking about wheat and autistic children earlier, they've done CAT scans and discovered that wheat attaches to opiate receptors in the brain, the same centers that heroin attaches to. So I don't need any convincing that sugar is addictive, even though Professor Yudkin did a lot of experiments with rats and gave them glucose, pure glucose, gave them pure fructose, and they all went for the pure fructose. It's addictive. Just be wary of it. And after a while, one of the problems with the deposition of fat in cells is not only does the cell not respond to insulin, the cell stops responding to leptin. Leptin is a hormone that tells your brain you've had enough to eat. If the brain isn't getting the message that you've had enough to eat, you're going to keep eating and eating and eating. And this is the cycle that a lot of overweight and obese patients get caught in. That once leptin stops working, then you're in big trouble because your weight's going to increase exponentially from there. The cause of the obesity pandemic is the removal of animal fat from foods, the addition of sugar, as we said, and glucose, as you saw a moment ago. Glucose assists the problem. It actually becomes an accomplice by raising insulin. And when you put lots of starch, all starches is a long chain of glucose molecules. Once you pump in lots and lots of starch, you're increasing and increasing the blood sugar level all the time and depositing more fat. The government solution is let's tax energy drinks and soft drinks, the high fructose containing drinks. Well, Professor James says basically that, well, let's put it like this. If I'm feeding you foods rich in fructose, I'm essentially causing you harm. It's not my intention to cause you harm, it's just fructose is dirt cheap, so you can produce food really cheaply. So my objective is to produce this food as cheaply as possible, feed as many people on the planet as possible. My objective is finished. Along comes the government and says, naughty, naughty, but we're not going to do anything about you because you've paid for the Olympics, you've paid for this, you've paid for that, you're paying all over the place. The best way out of it is to tax you lot. So not only are you being damaged by the foods that you're eating, but you're now going to have to pay a tax on the food that you're eating. And some of these foods you're addicted to, through no fault of your own. Now that to me is still leaving the fox in charge of the hen house. I'm still producing the food. I don't get punished, I don't get imprisoned, I don't get taxed, I don't get anything. I get away scot-free. And as I said last night, there seems to be a law for bankers, for pharmaceutical companies, for food companies, and there's another law for the rest of us. There's a pharmaceutical company, Pfizer, in the United States. They used an antibiotic illegally on 200 children in northern Nigeria. It was a clinical trial, an illegal clinical trial, because pharmaceutical companies have great difficulty getting clinical trials. And they need clinical trials to get their drug passed by the FDA or the FSA. Out of the 200 children who were treated for meningitis, 50 of them died. The Nigerian government say that 50 died. Pfizer say 19 died. It doesn't matter. If one died, that's too many. And the thing that I'm trying to convey here is that there's no point in blaming the pharmaceutical companies, and there's no point in blaming anybody really, because blame doesn't get you anywhere. I grew up in Northern Ireland in a country where people were blaming each other all over the place. Catholics were blaming Protestants, Protestants were blaming Catholics, the IRA were blaming the UVF and vice versa, and all it got us was deeper and deeper and deeper into a war. That is not the object of the exercise. The object of the exercise is to put yourself in the shoes of a CEO of a major company, major food company or a drug company. What's his objective? How is he feeling? He's in a dog-eat-dog world. His main objective is to produce profit. Without it, he's dead. He's going to be replaced with another CEO. So he must produce profit at any cost. And it's Machiavellian politics, but it's the truth. They will kill you, they will kill me, they will kill anybody in an effort to get this because they're blind. They don't see what they're doing. The lack of awareness is astonishing. The lack of accountability is astonishing. And they're getting away with it. So no point in criticizing the politicians either, because they're caught between your best interests and the best interests of people who employ thousands of people and pay lots and lots of taxes. Who would you side? If you were a politician tomorrow, who would you side with? You would obviously listen to the food companies and be at their beck and call. So don't blame the politicians either. There's no value in that. And I'll come to what to do in a moment. But you have to understand where everybody's at to understand how to solve a problem. If you're just pointing the fingers, that doesn't get anybody anywhere. And yeah, I'm going to come to President Mandela in a moment, because I lived in South Africa and I lived in Northern Ireland, and I saw what divisions in society do to people. But I'll come to that in a moment. Politicians are compromised, the nutritional advisors to governments are compromised, dietitians are compromised, doctors are compromised, everybody seems to be compromised and nobody's speaking the truth. The future, as we said in 2050, or Professor Philip James was saying earlier, 50% of us will be obese. Diabetes is the thing that's going to collapse the National Health Service in the UK and the public health service in this country. It's going to collapse health services all over the world, basically. It's going to drain the resources. Heart disease will increase, food allergies and intolerances will increase, and cancer is increasing exponentially, as you probably heard on Sky News the other day. It's increasing at an alarming rate. No blame. Put yourself in their shoes and understand the dynamics of these people and what makes them tick. Nelson Mandela used to say, revenge is sweet, forgiveness is a lot harder, but much sweeter. And he's absolutely right. That if you forgive these people for what they have done to humanity and get on with the business of solving the problem, look to the future. The future is, it's only when people become aware that they start to behave responsibly. So it starts with you, really. You have to become aware. You have to become aware of what you're eating and the effect that it's having on you. But you have to become aware of you as a human being and everything that affects you. And it's usually, as Pradeep says to me here, it's often your relatives that cause you the greatest difficulties. You have to become aware at all levels, at an emotional level, at a physical level, and at a spiritual level. And the thing that strikes me, forcibly, time and time again, having lived with African people are always looking over their shoulder at their ancestors who have departed, who have dead and gone. They're always making sacrifice to their ancestors. The dead are very important to them. Their mothers, their grandmothers, their fathers, their grandfathers, their whoever. They don't see themselves as separate. They see themselves as part of a tribe or part of a group of people. They live as an extended family where the uncles, the aunts, the relatives are all in the same compound. And they don't see themselves as detached from those who have passed on. And if you see yourself like that, rural Africans, I'm not talking about urban Africans, I'm talking about rural Africans, Aboriginal people, in your country the same, in South America, the Aboriginal people in South America, they all have accountability attached to them. They don't go digging holes in planet Earth because they look at planet Earth as they would look at their own child or their own reindeer or their own whatever, their own animals. They don't dig holes in them to suck out oil or to suck out nickel or to suck out uranium or whatever. The Aboriginals in Australia are confused by white people, as most primitive people are. They don't want anything to do with white people. So when I appeared on the scene in the bush in Nigeria with the tribe of Fulani, who are nomadic herders, they're not settled people, they travel from place to place. They take their cattle where the rains go, basically. They were shocked to see me. And I, in my stupidity and ignorance, said to them, do they vaccinate their cattle? And they said no. And I suggested that I would bring the government vet to get their cattle vaccinated. And the look on their faces changed very rapidly. They didn't want anything to do with me or with anybody else with authority. I grew up in Northern Ireland. My mother was a nurse. When somebody died in the community, she used to have to go and dress the body, cover the mirrors, open the windows. And I, as a child, used to watch this, and I asked her, why are you opening windows and covering mirrors? And she would say, to release the spirit. That's part of our culture. I grew up in a culture where there was a mountain beside us, and there was a fairy on top of the mountain, so the story went. I was a bit skeptical and then a bit cynical. And we were taught as children to leave out food for the fairies. So, being a scientist, I decided I'll watch what happens. So I left out some food and watched the local dog come along and eat the food. So I thought, oh, I've got her now, I've got her. So I said, do you know who ate the food we left out last night? And she said, I don't know. I said, it was the local dog. And she said, how do you know the fairies didn't send the dog to eat the food? That's the culture that we grew up in. We had a fairy tree close to our house. The county council wanted to build a road through that field. The farmers wouldn't allow it. The farmers and the whole community rose up and the county council had to back off. And I thought every culture was like that until I travelled and realised, well, in Africa they're like that as well because they have juju trees. They have juju places, sacred places that you don't go, you're not allowed to go to. And they have an understanding of the spiritual or unseen world, if you like. That's what's sadly lacking in the Western world today. There's no magic in the Western world, there's no spirituality, and there's certainly a severe lack of wisdom. Knowledge is useless. My mother used to say, I trained as a scientist and then as a doctor, and I thought I was the bee's knees. I knew much more than she did. But she used to say to me, knowledge is great, but knowledge without wisdom is useless. How right she was. You have to trust in nature. You have to trust in nature and in your own true nature. Nature does provide everything that you need. And trust the old ways. Trust in your mother, your grandmother, and the ways that things were done in the past, because you're going to have to go back to that. As the structures in your society collapse and decay, the old tried and tested ways that worked for generation upon generation upon generation will come back into play. And we'll all lead simpler lives as a consequence. Quotation from Barry Groves, man is the only species clever enough to make his own food and stupid enough to eat it. That's me. I was asked in Galway to set up a clinic in Galway, and I'm going to do a little bit because I wasn't well for a couple of years. This little virus kept reminding me that it was there. I'm a lot stronger now, so I'm going to do a little bit of work, just a teeny weeny little bit of work. I told a story last night, which I'll tell now as well, that when I lived in South Africa, our house got broken into. South Africa is a very violent country. Well, first of all, before I tell you the story, I grew up in Northern Ireland during the 50s and 60s. That was the time of the B specials. Do you know what the B specials were? Older people would know, younger people wouldn't know what the B specials were. The B specials were a paramilitary force. They were there to antagonize the local population, basically. And as a child, sitting in the back of a car, watching these B specials stick a submachine gun against my father's head and ask questions. That was the kind of abuse that the Catholic population suffered in Northern Ireland. There were many killings. I saw a lot of death when I was a child, and I had nightmares as a child. And my worst fear was to die violently. Now coming to South Africa, to the story in South Africa. Our house got broken into by two black guys. They tied us up and gagged us, and generally they kill you, so I was pretty certain I was going to greet death that particular night. And my greatest fear was to die violently because of my childhood experiences. And after, by divine intervention, they didn't kill us. They took our car, took everything we had of any value in the house, and drove off. And I sat on the bed when the security came and untied us. I sat there for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and my heart was beating and beating and beating, pounding. The adrenaline was still flowing. And I realized two realizations came to me. I had faced my greatest fear, and I was free to say anything I wanted, to do anything I wanted. And I genuinely felt free, which is hard to explain when you've been through such a traumatic experience. That was the first thing that I felt. The second thing that I felt was I greeted death here. Death was very close. And my priority suddenly went A, B, C, D, E. in my head. And the only thing that was important to me were the people that I loved, my children in particular. And that is the only thing that's important, and that's what you take with you when you die. You can't take a Mercedes-Benz car with you when you die. You can't take nice treats like that when you die. The love you have inside you for people and for your loved ones in particular is the single most important aspect of your life. The rest is all nonsense. The rest is all paraphernalia. Yes, you have to work to survive. At that stage I decided I was going to work half days because I wanted to collect my children from school. I was a single parent at that stage. I got divorced. And I collected my children from school at 2 o'clock and I spent the rest of the day with them to make sure, because when you go through an experience like that, it's a bit like a near-death experience. You suddenly become much more sensitized and much more aware. And that's how people become aware all of a sudden. If you want a sudden increase in a level of awareness, then ask for a traumatic event. I know you'll be doing that, everyone tonight will be doing that, but it does do it. I mean, people who've had near-death experiences will report exactly the same thing. That maybe the person was a farmer and used to shoot animals, used to shoot rabbits or, I don't know, geese or whatever. Suddenly they can't use a gun anymore. Suddenly they can't kill animals anymore. They have a great respect, a higher level of respect for themselves, first of all, and a higher level of respect for everybody else, and a higher level of respect for the animals and the plants that inhabit the earth, and for the earth itself, which provides you with all this food. So, by raising your level of awareness is the way out of this equation. Don't cooperate with anyone or anything, and don't accept any words of wisdom from me or from anybody else unless you agree with it, unless it feels right for you. But raise your level of awareness, please, because it's up to you to take control of this situation that's happening in Western society. It's up to you to stop supporting supermarkets, to stop supporting bad food, and eat only good food. That's the end of the talk. Thank you. Thank you. If there's any questions, I'll answer them quickly. Yep.
Just regarding carbohydrates, you obviously spell out how fructose is harmful and wheat. But what about other forms of carbohydrates? You know, are they form part of
No, carbohydrate intrinsically by itself, not a problem. Carbohydrate is not going to do you harm because it's just glucose. And glucose is universal energy. So it's not going to do you harm. But when you combine it with fructose, then it's a problem. Most fat is not deposited in cells. When it's deposited in cells, and therefore in organs are made up of cells. If there's fat in your liver, fat in your heart, fat in your kidneys, fat in whatever organ, then it's a problem. So deposited fat is a problem because it will produce estrogen and produce inflammatory markers. Fat in your diet's not going to deposit unless you eat fructose. If you eat lots of fructose, then you're in trouble. And that's the culprit. That's the real culprit. Yeah?
Why do so many doctors insist on giving people statins when I'm telling you not to eat butter, not to eat eggs, not to eat beef?
Well, you'll have to ask them, because I don't understand that either. I really don't understand that. If you can get somebody off diabetic medication in a couple of weeks by restricting all carbohydrates from the diet and using a ketogenic type diet, which means you burn fat, basically. You burn some of that stored fat. That's the only way you're going to solve the obesity crisis. There is no other way of solving it. Because as long as you keep putting in starch and fructose, deposited fat is going to cause a problem. The reason why they said cholesterol was causing heart disease is because they did autopsies in some of these people in the 1950s. Some of them young men after the Second World War were dying of heart disease. And when they did post-mortems on them, they discovered lots of cholesterol in the walls of the arteries. And that's the reason why they thought, the theory was at that time, fat in the diet is causing heart disease. But logically that's not true. And what is actually happening today, they discovered that cholesterol is playing a positive role. Cholesterol is trying to repair the damage that has been done because of sugar, basically. Sugar sets up the inflammatory markers. The inflammatory markers cause heart disease, and cholesterol deposits in the wall trying to solve the problem. So when you do the post-mortem, you find lots of cholesterol. Yeah, that's the problem when you jump to conclusions. Science is marvelous. I mean, if you look at man has existed on this planet for 4 million years as hunter-gatherers, mostly eating animal produce, animal fat, saturated fat in other words, and existing on a few berries and nuts and fruits and things that grew wild. It's only in the last 10,000 years that man has settled. So animal fat has nothing to do with ill health. Otherwise, these people, we would have had evidence of heart disease, strokes, blah, 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 and so on. If there was a problem with animal fat, there's absolutely no problem with animal fat whatsoever. None. Antibiotics were used as growth enhancers. Estrogen was also used as a growth enhancer. But antibiotics have been banned in the European Union, not in the United States, but in the European Union. The use of animal antibiotics as growth enhancers has been banned in the EU. All antibiotics. It was restricted to a few antibiotics back in the 1990s, and then in 2007, I think it was, when a total ban was brought in. And so there's no antibiotics being used in animal feeds in Europe today. Not so in the rest of the world. But a little story about estrogen in food. In the French meat market, they have strong macho guys who used to carry the carcasses for the butchers. They're called les forts, the strong ones. And the butchers used to make a delicacy for them using the necks of chickens. And after a while, these men started to grow breast tissue, much to their embarrassment and everybody else's embarrassment. So they had to find out why were these people growing breast tissue. And they traced the chicken necks back to one particular farm. And they were injecting the necks of chickens with stilbestrol, which is an estrogen hormone. Estrogen retains salt and water in the body, so it increases body weight. So it was a clever way of making your chicken or your hen or whatever animal fatter and fatter and fatter through the use of estrogen. That's what they used to do, but again, that doesn't happen anymore today in Europe, yeah?
Is there a connection between diet and psoriasis?
That's a very good question, actually. Psoriasis is a very dry, extremely dry skin condition. It's an inherited condition. Conventional medicine would say the two best things for it are salted water or coal tar, something like that, and sunlight, ultraviolet light. The way we look at it is, again, you look at the dynamics within the particular person. You keep in mind what your conventional medical training, but you also look at other dynamics that are going on within the person. The main dietary requirement for somebody with a dry skin condition are essential fatty acids. Linseed oil, flaxseed oil, fish oils, omega-3 oils. We used to do tests on people, and the majority of people that showed up as deficient in omega-3, not deficient in omega-6, but deficient in omega-3. A lot of people are deficient in omega-3. But to be honest with you, any condition that comes with a label, if anybody comes to me and you've got asthma, let's say, I ignore the diagnosis immediately. I've heard it, but I'm not going to act on it. Because asthma can be psychological, it can be nutritional, it can be infective, it can be exercise-based, it can have lots of origins. So always what you're trying to do when you help somebody is look at the emotional state of the person, look at the mental state of the person, look at the physical state of the person, and see what you can do to help. Again, ignoring the diagnosis, not completely ignoring the diagnosis, but trying to downplay it, if you like. I'm going to talk about the interaction of emotion and food. Your emotional state, if you're stressed, you're anxious, you're depressed, you have low self-esteem or whatever, is going to dictate your choice of food. Because when you're in a negative frame of reference, you're often attracted to negative foods, foods that are going to cause you harm, like sugar and white flour. So you tend to binge on chocolate, my favorite, on chocolate, sugar, white flour, things like that. So negative will attract negative. When you're in a healthy state of mind, you will be more conscious, more aware, and you'll tend to eat healthier kind of foods. So your emotional state plays a role, and the reason why it plays a role is when you're in a negative state of mind, you're trying to quell the emotion, and food is a comfort in that situation, and it helps you to forget about the emotion. So you can suppress the emotion using food, if you like, by busying yourself. If you distract yourself enough, you forget about what you were feeling. The problem with using negative foods like that is it actually compounds the problem. But there's also an interplay between food and emotion. I used to work in a shop when I was a child. I lived in the country and we were two houses on a road junction, and the house opposite us had a shop. And I used to work in the shop filling tea bags and sugar bags and all kinds of bags and selling them. And they used to pay me in spangles and fruit pastilles and fruit gums, and whole nut, Cadbury's whole nut was my favorite, delicious. And I used to have to go hide it from my mother in case she took it away. And then at night time spread it out on the bed and gloat and get excited by what was in front of me. But then I started to experience not just sugar addiction, I started to experience hypoglycemia. Started to get dips in my blood sugar level where you get shaky and have to eat something quickly. Get a hollow feeling in the stomach and need to eat something quickly. That's hypoglycemia. And then went to university and ate rubbish, basically. At university, food was a necessary evil. You had to eat just to stay alive, and you got it done with as quickly as possible. So my diet was bad, to say the least. And through experimentation, I discovered what was doing it. That food was making me feel bad, that I was getting depressed, I was getting irritable, I was getting anxious for no good reason, and I didn't understand it. I didn't understand why am I getting these mood changes when this is not really me. And a sudden moment of realization made me realize that it's got to do with my diet. So food can interplay with you, and you can interplay with food. So emotion can depend on what you eat, and the food itself can dictate your emotion. The way out of this, the simplest thing to do, if you think of any food that might be causing you a problem, is to abstain from it for a week, take it for a week, abstain from it for a week, take it for a week. And if when you're taking it, on the 2 weeks that you're taking it, is causing you problems, then you have power, you have insight and you have power. The other way to control is through breathing techniques. And Dr. Chadha, where is he gone to? He's disappeared from the front row. There you are. That's the reason why I work with Dr. Chadha. Dr. Chadha is a psychiatrist who doesn't use drugs to treat people. He uses breathing techniques and visualization and meditation to help people. And when you treat gut problems or nutritional issues, you always come up against emotion. And that's the reason why I work with him, because of this link, if you like, that I'm not equipped to deal with emotional problems. And that's the reason why I refer to Dr. Chadha. So, important that if you feel that a food is causing you difficulty, or you're not sure, or you're stressed, or you're anxious, or whatever, take some deep breaths and hold your breath. And it'll build up carbon dioxide in your bloodstream and it will relax you. That's what you do with asthmatics. If asthmatics or having an acute asthmatic attack, you get them to breathe in and out of a bag, and they're breathing in carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is a vasodilator. It'll dilate the arteries and it will calm you down. That's one technique. Don't rush in and eat something. You see the chocolate, or you see the juicy cake, or you see the box of biscuits or whatever. Take some deep breaths and allow your awareness to come to the fore and ask yourself, do you really want this food or not? Okay. Okay, I think we'll finish. Again, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. I really appreciate you coming. I want you to remember tonight, and when you walk out the door, when you walk into a supermarket, don't walk in blind. Don't let your subconscious mind dictate what you're going to buy in the supermarket. Be very, very conscious about what you're doing, and you'll have better health as a consequence. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.